Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. As you can see, I'm not Professor Jimmy Whitworth. He's unable to join today to chair this webinar on the Sir Rickard Christopher's Medal. But I'm delighted to be here. I'm Tamar Ghosh, I'm Chief Executive here at RSTMH. And once again, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. So this is a great chance to look at the experience of 4 of our past winners of this amazing medal and hear their advice and stories on how it's impacted their career. We really hope that by joining today, you might be inspired to nominate someone for this medal, which you can do up until the 10th of March. But before we get into the detail, a bit of an introduction. So RSTMH, I'm sure many of you know us. I hope that you're members of the society. If not, please do consider joining. We are a membership society for those working in or interested in tropical medicine and global health. We've been operating since 1907. Based in the UK, we have thousands of volunteers across the world who help us deliver a very busy schedule of meetings and events like this one, online and in person, of grants. And if you don't know, we've just launched our early career grants program, giving grants of £5,000 to people who have not had research funding before on any topic in tropical medicine or global health. Do have a look at that if that's you or someone you know. We also publish 2 scientific journals, Transactions and International Health. And we give out medals and awards. So that's the topic of the conversation today. The medals and awards are a great way to recognise success in our community at all levels. We have medals and awards recognising those early in their career, mid-career, and also senior in their career. And this one, the Sir Rickard Christopher's Medal, is recognising those at the senior side of their career who have achieved an awful lot. So today we're really lucky that we're joined by 4 of our recent Sir Rickard Christopher Medal winners, and they're going to share with you the stories of how the medal winning has helped them on their career path, what they've achieved since, and they're going to provide some advice for future applicants. So if you're thinking of nominating someone else, their words will be very important. A little bit about the webinar before we start. The Sir Rickard Christopher's Medal, as I mentioned, is open until the 10th of March, and it's 5 o'clock BST, which is the time that you need to be aware of. It is outstanding work in tropical medicine and hygiene, and it looks for evidence of field and practical application. This medal is given out every 3 years. It can be open to anyone working in the fields I've mentioned that you feel meets the criteria. The person that wins this must be a member or fellow, and you must be nominated. So you can't nominate yourself for this one. You have to nominate somebody else. So if you have someone in mind throughout today, do please put them forward. And do please email myself, Amelia, or Nazreen about any questions that you might have regarding the medal itself. Okay. So we'll have some time at the end of the webinar when all of our speakers have given their thoughts for some questions and answers. And please do put those in the Q&A. All right, so I'm going to start. So we have 4 speakers. Our first one is Professor Liz Corbett. Now, all of our speakers, Liz included, have an amazing level of experience and multiple roles. So we're going to post in the chat their full bios. It would take me too long to read them out. But the summary is Professor Liz Corbett is clinical epidemiologist at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, a great friend to the society. Congratulations, Liz, again on winning this medal, and please, over to you to hear your thoughts.
Sorry. Thank you so much. Okay, lovely. That's fantastic. Could those slides be in full screen mode? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really honoured to receive the medal and to be invited to talk about how winning this medal has impacted my career. And I'm just going to do a very quick disclaimer, which is that I did say, well, it's a bit early to know exactly how this medal has impacted my career, but I did win a medal from the society over 20 years ago. So that was the early career medal, and that really did impact my career. So the talk I'm giving now will just quickly run through different aspects of my specialist area, which is diagnostic intervention, impact design and impact evaluation. Next. This is the work leading up to winning the early career medal. I started out, so I did my clinical training, and then I went onto the Wellcome Trust scheme, starting with a clinical PhD fellowship. Those schemes are fantastic. They give you a really decent amount of money to investigate serious problems as a PhD student. So I think I had like 140,000 or something for this particular fellowship, which also I had a really good look around. I was interested in TB. TB is difficult for various reasons. The diagnostics are expensive, and I ended up in the South African gold mines really because they had just fantastic infrastructure there and a lot of cases. And this is just one piece from that. Epidemiology showing that HIV had a major impact on how long people with TB remained infectious before diagnosis, and so that was one of the critical pieces that came out and started my interest in undiagnosed TB and also undiagnosed HIV. So sort of leading into the rest of my intervention work. Next slide. I then went back to this time to Zimbabwe, working on those same areas, so HIV testing interventions. I had worked with Rashida Farand. Next slide, please. Yep, and sorry, thank you. And I picked up the very wonderful Ethel Daruya, who's shown there in the caravan picture, who really was the most amazing project manager and still works with Rashida. Rashida's now in Zimbabwe, so that's sort of one of the keys, I think, to my success has been, really getting good talent spotting and getting really excellent people who enjoy working with me and who I like working with and who really deliver. If anyone knows me well, they know that I'm like the last person you want for deadlines. So, that's always been people who are like good organizers, good deadline oriented have been key to my success. And really the work I'm talking about, a fraction of it is mine. And we so that work led on to on my second fellowship there, a TB case finding impact evaluation trial, a cluster randomized trial, Detect TB. Next slide. And that led to this Lancet publication. Comparing two different active case finding strategies for undiagnosed TB at community level in Zimbabwe. And had a huge impact, policy impact. Next slide, please, with triggering immediately guidelines, guideline development group by WHO, and that's the first new guidelines in this area since 1970, and really globally case finding. Although it's hard to evaluate well, it's been sort of thundering along really. Since those guidelines were released, encouraging countries to identify ways to do case finding. We have the 2021 guideline update, but really, so this is one of the major reasons why there's been improvements in TB control globally. Next slide. I then moved to Blantyre in Malawi, and that was partly to take advantage of the opportunities at that time around global health initiatives. Zimbabwe still is under sanctions, and a country that's sanctioned, it's difficult to get the sort of major investments that you need for some of these types of interventions, particularly the kind of follow-on funding. and Malawi's very pro-research, very wonderful policymakers that are really easy to work with. As soon as you show impact, that it's in the Global Fund application, and people are willing to let you try things for the first time. And this just highlights Peter McPherson, brilliant TB epidemiologist, Mariette Nwasa, who runs the TB/HIV group at College of Medicine. So I had sort of two homes. Mainly, I was in MLW, working with Augustine Shoko, but I also had a foot in the College of Medicine door, and that again was sort of strategic to make sure that we've got good capacity building, good links into the national programs. Next slide. I was working on this mainly on undiagnosed HIV this time, and this fitted into a global initiative around improving HIV control. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. Thank you, brilliant. And just run through that. So this is the at the time globally, there was a really great test, but no self-testing whatsoever. There was no system to do self-testing. Self-testing was actually banned, legally banned in many countries. And we thought, well, you know, I just became kind of obsessed with wanting to try it out. Again, Malawi is a place where you can do that. So with the blessing of a national program, we carried out this trial of HIV self-testing in 28 intervention clusters in Blantyre, that's 16,660 adults. And what we showed was very high uptake, especially in that younger age group. Next slide. So just go through. Thank you. That's perfect. That 16 to 19-year-old, very high uptake. At the end of 12 months of being able to take up self-testing, we had almost 100% of young women tested, and that 16 to 19-year-old group is very hard to reach. And we also had relatively good uptake among men, so also hard to reach. And we had a very intensive safety signal system built into that project. So we were able to say no deaths, no murders, no suicides, despite a lot of undiagnosed HIV coming to attention. Next slide. Sorry, that's great. That led on to this proposal to Unitaid. So that's one of the major global funders that was successful to catalyze self-testing in 4 different Southern African countries, aiming to get multi-country evidence to develop self-testing guidelines. So these are our sort of high-level goals for the project. So to lead to normative WHO guidelines that support self-testing, to have national guidelines and algorithms in every country by the end of the project. There was no country with guidelines at the time. At least one HIV test kit package for self-testing on the approved diagnostic list for donors. So that means countries can use funds to buy kits. And to have price reductions. There was one kit being worked out for the American market for $40, and we were looking for less than 2.75. And we met those 4 goals. So the aim was to meet those goals by 2020. We actually met them all by 2017. Next slide. Sorry, I need to rush through here. And we had a very, you know, again, I would take like a fraction of the credit for this. I put the team together. But we had some real fantastic workers at every level, including our project my boss on this project was Karen Hatzold of Population Services International. And we had you know, really good output, great capacity building, and huge impact on policy. Next slide. And just run through the animations here. Thank you. So we went from on the left-hand side in 2013. That's a picture of one of our Malawian participants. We were sort of using professional use test kits repackaged with some information for self-testing. We went from that 13,000 in 2013 right through to 2020, when we had 20 million self-test kits used in 56 different countries. So, you know, a huge impact. And with WHO, one of the partners on the team, said that meant that we had very prompt guideline development as well. Next slide. And just very quickly, you know, what does it look like? So we had 8 different randomized trials. Augustine Choco in Malawi did 2 of them, based around antenatal care clinic attendees. And this was investigating whether women from antenatal clinics could safely and effectively take test kits home for their men. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. Perfect. And on the left, that's the Augustine's 5 different self-testing arms compared to standard of care. So you can see huge impact and not much effect of incentivization there. So there's kind of no need to incentivize other than just giving the kits itself for actual male partner testing. But for the male partners to come back to start antiretroviral therapy or be circumcised within 28 days, that's shown on the right-hand panel. And there you do see a strong effect of linkage enablers for the partner. So just a very beautiful illustration, I think, of, you know, design of intervention trials and how you can sort of follow through to the linkage and the health impact. Next slide. And Augustine then went on to do a pragmatic trial with the Ministry of Health. That was 28 different facilities in Malawi, and that was published in Lancet Global Health. Next slide. So prospective applicants, I'd say, you know, you won't win if you don't apply. So, you know, certainly if you think you've got a good story, recognition for you, your teams, and your future funding success are really important. And just from that early career stage, working up a strong track record, you know, tackle important areas in fundable, important issues in fundable areas. Know your strengths. So for me, I think, you know, my strong points, I'd say curiosity. I love teamwork, and you know, I do that talent spotting well. And I do know my weaknesses and aim to complement those. And for policy impact, anything related to that, you know, you've really got to keep you've got to work closely with your national policymakers and international policymakers from day one, and really keep track of what that policy impact is. It's surprisingly hard to pull it out if you don't, you know, update your CV on a sort of regular basis with that impact data. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Liz, for that. It's lovely to hear some of the highlights of your career and your thoughts towards the end. Please do, for everyone, please do think about questions you might want to ask Liz and post them in the Q&A for later. So we're going to move on to our second speaker. So I'm now delighted to introduce Professor Alan Fenwick, OBE, who is Emeritus Professor at Imperial College London, former President of RSTMH, and also founder of the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative. Alan, we're delighted to have you here and to hear your thoughts on how it's impacted your career. Over to you.
Can you hear me? That's the first thing.
Yes,
or am I muted? You can hear me?
We can hear you. Over
Excellent.
to you.
Well, I haven't prepared any slides, and I thought I would spend a little time on how I got to where I am. My life, working life, really was set in 4 different stages, and it all hinged on what happened to me in 1961, which was an awful long time ago, when I went to a lecture on parasitology at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and the lecturer talked about schistosomiasis and bilharzia. And I just couldn't believe the life cycle, where it came from, how it developed, and what happened to it in the future. I was very fortunate at various stages of my life. The first good fortune was that the East African community, in their wisdom, advertised for somebody who was a biologist with an interest in chemistry in order to kill snails that were transmitting bilharzia in Tanzania. There's no such thing as a biologist with an interest in chemistry at that time, but I was a chemist with an interest in biology, and so applied for the job and was very fortunate to get it. And in 1966, I went to Tanzania, where I spent 5 years. And again, I had the most incredible good luck to find a situation where baboons were transmitting schistosomiasis to humans. This was relatively unknown and relatively new. And it caught the interest of Professor George Nelson at the London School. So that when he had a job opportunity 5 years later to go for someone to go to Sudan and work with two very bright, wonderful PhDs who had just graduated from the London School, I put my hand up and he invited me to go and join them for 9 months. And I went there with the task of making sure that these two people had some funding and would be successful. 17 years later, having joined the Blue Nile Health Project, I found that the two gentlemen I was supposed to promote, one was the Minister of Health and the other was the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine. So I decided that my job was over. Again, good luck happened, that the Americans then decided that they would support Egypt as a result of signing a peace agreement with Israel. And they would fund all sorts of things within Egypt, one of which was a health project. The Minister of Health in Egypt decided that schistosomiasis was the greatest health problem that needed solving. No Americans would be willing to go to live in Egypt at the time, because there was a lot of unease against the Americans by the Palestinians. And so they looked for me to go and be chief of party in a 10-year project, which I was very, very happy to do. But I was in the right place at the right time. Also, I was in the right place because the World Bank then decided to give an awful lot of money to Egypt to actually implement chemotherapy. And the prevalence of schistosomiasis in rural Egypt at the time was well over 30%. And the job of the American money and the World Bank money was to reduce that prevalence to a very low level. A lot of people helped me. I worked hard with the Ministry of Health and with the research people in universities in Egypt, and we were successful. And when I left, the prevalence of schistosomiasis in rural Egypt was less than 2%. So then what to do? I was approaching retirement age, but decided that my ambition was to see that people outside of Egypt were also made available. Praziquantel, the drug, was made available to them. I had been involved in the testing of praziquantel when it first was discovered with work that I did in the Sudan. And I was amazed just how successful praziquantel could be and had been in Egypt. But I was also amazed that it wasn't available to anybody in sub-Saharan Africa. And so I was lucky enough to read in the paper about a certain Bill Gates, who was starting his foundation with Melinda. And I applied to him with the suggestion that this was an easy win, treating people with praziquantel sub-Saharan Africa, particularly children, would be highly effective in improving their health. The problem was that praziquantel was not cheap. However, there was a cheaper version just coming through, having been manufactured in South Korea. And I calculated that for every dollar that we were given by Bill Gates, we would be able to treat an individual once a year, and therefore we'd be able to reach out to a very large number of people. Somehow we managed to tick the right boxes, and he gave me a very generous grant, providing that I was based in a UK university, and Imperial College very kindly accepted to have me there. This was thanks to Sir Roy Anderson, who was the head of department at the time. So we set up the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative with a grant of over $30 million from Bill Gates, and we started treating as an experiment to prove that the governments in Africa would actually take on treating people for schistosomiasis, and that having done so, it would be successful. And over the next 6 or 8 years, this is exactly what happened. We managed to get over 40 million children treated in 6 countries, and the acceptance was great. There were no side effects. The ministries were on board because it didn't cost them anything. We provided everything except local personnel, and we had the foundation of a really successful treatment program. But could we expand to the rest of Africa, which was my ambition? Bill Gates said he wouldn't give us any more money, but he said, "You've been so successful that I'm sure someone will." And we were very fortunate over the next few years to get money from the United States government and the British government, and so expanded STI coverage. And by the time, I was going to say when I got the medal, but it was a couple of years after that, we had treated 200 million times with praziquantel in 16 different countries in Africa. So I did, rather like Liz, also get a medal from the Royal Society back, I think it was in 2003, and then was awarded in 2015 the Rickard Christopher Medal. Those medals and those awards came to me, but I could not have done and would not have deserved any of those medals without the funding that we received from the British government, the American government, and the Gates Foundation, and many other foundations and donors who supported us. Imperial College were fantastic hosts. They very kindly gave me a professorship, and then when I retired, made me an emeritus professor, which, as you can imagine, goes down very well with many, many people in many, many places. So the one point I want to make is that I've been incredibly lucky. Yes, you could say that we have done a lot of achievements, particularly if in more than just schistosomiasis, but also spreading out since 2003 in the group of people who have been working on neglected tropical diseases. And there have been double benefits. First of all, there's the benefit of recognition of achievements over a large period of time, the recognition of the people who've worked with me over that period of time, but then an acknowledgement of what we tried to do was really worthwhile. And that has continued since the medal was awarded, not only for myself, but also for the people who took over from me when I retired. Now, in a way, there is a difficulty in deciding what to do, because the terms of reference of the medal is virtually a lifetime achievement. And in my case, I think I'm probably a little bit older than most people who were awarded that medal. And so there wasn't too much time beyond me receiving the medal to actually gain the benefit from it. I did. I had tremendous support as a medal holder from the Royal Society itself, and I happily served for a period as Vice President. To be President would have been very nice, but I really was too old for it. And I think that the people who've taken over since I was Vice President have done a fantastic job. And Tamar has also come in, and I'd like to pay my respect to what she has managed to achieve with the Royal Society. And I'd like to say to anybody who is looking at this webinar who is not a member of the Royal Society, please come and join. So there have been, since 2015, great progress. SCI expanded, more money came from the British government. Unfortunately, that was cut short by the previous Prime Minister a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, and that left SCI in a little bit of a difficult place. Wendy Harrison took over from me and has done a fantastic job. She moved SCI out of Imperial College, which was the right thing to do at the time, and formed a charity in its own right. And for those of you who don't know, SCI is no longer in existence, except the name. The name has changed to Unlimit Health. And actually, I just received by email this morning an incredible history of what Unlimit Health has managed to do over the last 12 months. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, I would strongly recommend that you look up Unlimit Health. And if you can donate to help it to continue its work, remember, it still holds true that for every pound which is donated, we are able to treat 3 children against schistosomiasis and intestinal worms in sub-Saharan Africa. And I believe that we're still running at about 60 to 80 million treatments every year in that program. And that wouldn't have happened without the recognition that we've had, because this sort of medal, and I must say there have been a few other medals that we've been fortunate enough to gather together, show people that we really are a worthwhile organization, that our plan works, and that we are achieving a tremendous amount in improving the health of people in sub-Saharan Africa. Just to put a highlight on it and a slight feather in SCI's cap is that the Imperial College Faculty of Medicine celebrated its 25th year anniversary, and the dean of the faculty asked for recommendations for people and organizations which had made a big achievement in that 25 years to make the Faculty of Medicine in Imperial College with such a good reputation as it has today. And SCI was recommended for what it had done and received a medal saying that they had had the greatest overseas impact of any part of the Faculty of Medicine. And again, that reflects what we've already done, the medals that we've got, and it is just another accolade. But it's an accolade that's after I have retired, and so I'm really very thrilled. The one point I want to make is, at what age should we recommend someone for this? Because I was 73 when I was given this medal, and therefore my working life was coming to an end. So in a way, you could say that if you gave it to someone who is 10 or 15 years younger, they will still have had and will still show that they've had a really good working life and achievement, but they still have time to benefit a little bit more than possibly someone who is given the medal at a later date. Something to think about. Tamar, I think that's more than enough.
Thank you, Alan. That's great and lovely to hear the highlights of your career. Do please post questions in the Q&A that you might have for Alan. Thank you again. All right, so moving on to our third speaker, Professor Bridget Wells. Bridget is Professor of Tropical Medicine and Honorary Consultant in Paediatrics at the Centre for Tropical Medicine and Global Health at the University of Oxford, also a trustee of RSTMH and chair of the International Members Committee. Bridget, over to you to hear your thoughts on how it's impacted your career.
Okay, the first slide, please. Thank you. So having listened to the first two speakers, I guess I'm in the middle, really. I am a bit younger than Alan, but also somewhat older than Liz. And I can echo Alan's comments about the timing in your career when one receives such an award. I spent most of my working life living and working in the tropics, first in Malawi and later in Vietnam for more than 20 years. That was after having completed training in internal medicine, paediatrics and ID in the UK. But basically from the early 90s, I had been based in a tropical environment, heavily embedded within local medical systems, focusing on clinical medical research, teaching and training, always working in close collaboration with local clinicians and scientists, and aiming to effect change that would have local impact. And in 2018, when I was awarded this medal, I can honestly say that it had never occurred to me that I would be eligible for such an award. I had been a member of RSTMH. Back when I lived in Malawi, I knew Malcolm Molyneux very well then, and I had been working with him. I was a member. I, in fact, got not a medal, but a prize for a poster at one of the annual meetings. So I was involved with the society. But after I moved to Vietnam, which was in the mid-late 1990s, my membership lapsed. Certainly then there was very little reach of the society within Asia, and I just kind of forgot about it. So it was a big surprise when I was proposed by one of my colleagues in Vietnam, and then a great honor to receive the award. And this was, to me, I see it as not just an award to me, but in some way as a kind of validation of my type of career. Effectively, I was completely embedded in a system outside the UK. Obviously, I write papers, I apply for grants, etc., but I have been somewhat removed from UK academia. And although the work was hugely rewarding for me personally, it was very nice to get that external recognition. And so I would echo Alan's comments about being very lucky in my career, but would reiterate that receiving the medal is not just for me, but also recognises and acknowledges all the colleagues, the grant funders, the other individuals who have contributed so generously to the success of my career. So when I was asked to talk about the impact on my career, I spent some time thinking about it, because effectively my career is coming, I mean, it's not ended, but it is coming towards the end. And at the time when I was awarded the medal, I knew very little about Rickard Christophers, except that he had lived to be over 100 and was one of the foremost malariologists of his time, had been president of the society for some years, etc. So I took this as an opportunity to find out a bit more about him, while also reflecting on its importance to me. So most of I've got a few slides to show which basically highlight the major events, well, what I see as major events in his life. And most of the information comes from obituaries, which there are quite a few, but I was also able to find several photos which give more of a feel of him as a person. So next slide. So he was born and raised in Liverpool, qualified in medicine in 1896 in Liverpool, and in 1897 he became a ship's doctor on an expedition journeying to the upper Amazon basin. And this photograph is him in 1897 on the ship in the upper Amazon basin. Excuse me. He did that for about a year, and then he joined the Colonial Office as part of the Malaria Commission. So this is 1898. And he ended up working on malaria in Blantyre, which was then Nyasaland. So that was very relevant to me, and I also see to Liz. He continued working on malaria in West Africa until 1901, doing seminal work on malaria and its vectors, until the Malaria Commission moved its head office to India in 1901. And he was then based primarily with the Indian Medical Service for the next 30 years, working on malaria, but also other organisms, including leishmania and a range of things. Next, please. So during this time, he worked in a lot of environments around, directly at the coal face, as it were, in India. He was in Myanmar for a while. He was seconded to, it's called the Mesopotamia Expeditionary Force during World War I. And these two photos are of him with his colleagues on board a ship, which was the main clinical laboratory for the Mesopotamia Evolutionary Force, which was based in Basra. I found a photo next of the ship. So this is the RMIS Elphinstone, which was he was based on for several years. But this photo was actually taken in Myanmar, so it shows that he travelled around in quite difficult circumstances, but he was clearly enthused by his research in all of these interesting places. So this is actually the RMIS Elphinstone in Yangon, well, it was Rangoon then. Subsequently, he became much more, how shall I say, establishment. So he was knighted in 1931. He became Professor of Malaria Studies, in charge of the experimental malaria unit at the London School. And then he became Vice President and later President of RSTMH. And somewhere along the way, he was also physician to the King. So he really was a very establishment figure. But it's clear that for most of his working life, he was a dedicated, hardworking scientist who lived and worked in really quite difficult circumstances, very much focused on effecting real change in endemic settings. And so that sort of resonates with, I think, what Liz talked about, what Alan talked about, and also I feel with what I have tried to do in my career. Next slide. Sorry, I've had a bit of a cough. So he progresses during the 1930s and 40s, becoming this a very senior figure in the world of malariology. And these photos show him at meetings in India on the left, He's in the middle row, and he's in the front row of the meeting in Singapore on the right. So, not unexpectedly for the times, all the individuals in these photos are men. And they're mainly, well, I think virtually all, white men. So that brings me to my first personal reflection. I was awarded the medal in 2018, and I am, or was then, the first woman to be awarded this medal. Subsequently, of course, Liz has been awarded it, which was great. But I think it's made me, I mean, I always was very aware of equality and diversity issues, but it has highlighted it for me and made me think that it's one of the major focuses, if you like, of my working life now, is trying to look at issues around diversity and inclusion in my career, both in Oxford, looking at issues in academia, in organisations like RSTMH, and not just related to women, but also all aspects of diversity. So I would say that receiving this award didn't change me into focusing on that, but it did emphasise that it's a really important thing to try and effect change. The second thing is that it reintroduced me to the society. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I had been a member and then I lapsed, didn't really think about the society at all. But after being proposed and awarded for this medal, I was subsequently elected as a trustee. And I think that has been something which I have really valued, the working with Tamar. I'm now chair of one of the committees of the organisation, and it's been a very valuable experience for me. And I hope that I have also been able to bring some of particularly my interest in equality and diversity to the society. Finally, I would say one of the reasons why my membership lapsed was there's very little awareness of the society's work in Asia. It has always been, or until recently, has been very prominent in Africa, in many countries in Africa, but its reach in Asia is less. So one of the things that it has encouraged me to do is to try and increase that reach. And I think we are, with Tamar and other members of the society, I think that is changing. So I'm very pleased to see that. Again, echoing what Alan said, I'm somewhat towards the end of my career, so it's hard to say other things that the award has definitively changed for me, because I was already pretty much well on my own trajectory by the time I received it. But I would go back to what I said at the beginning and say that the validation and the recognition of careers that may not be mainstream in UK academia is something that I think is very important, and I think differentiates this medal from some of the other medals that are awarded by the society. Just going back to Sir Rickard Christophers, as you can see, he worked very hard. He was an eminent person in the later stages of his career, but he was also, next slide, quite fun. So this is my favourite photograph of him, partly because this is in Blantyre in Malawi, taken in 1899, but also because I can't imagine he ever imagined that this photograph would be being seen by people 120 years later on a webinar. But it seems that he is, or was, next slide, a very relaxed person. This is a quote that I found from by Sir Philip Manson-Barr, who was the son-in-law of Manson. So he says, this was in 1956, Christopher's is known everywhere for his endearing qualities. He has a modest bearing and a curious, hesitant manner, accompanied by a cheerful giggle. He is the friend, philosopher, and mentor of all keen young men of science, which I think is a very nice quote, except I would say it would be nice for all young people of science. So I'll stop there, and I'm obviously happy to take any questions later.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Bridget, for sharing that with us. Okay, so we are running slightly late on time. Please do stay with us. We do have our final speaker, and then we do have hopefully a time for a couple of questions, a bit more news to share with you before we leave you. So please do stay a few more minutes if you can. So our final speaker, this is Professor Mike English, is Wellcome Trust Senior Research Fellow and Professor of International Child Health at the University of Oxford. Mike, welcome, and over to you to share your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. And it's a pleasure to be talking to everybody. I hope you can see the screen okay and hear me okay. Clearly, I'm echoing many of the things my colleagues have already said. One is you can't do this by yourself. And so any prize is a recognition of a much broader effort and also often a much broader environment. It's also a recognition of the support one's had on one's way, which includes funders, but also many colleagues who are peers who discuss things with you and may not actually be in your team. But having a peer group around you and or a set of individuals, mentors, if you like, that you can frame your ideas with is extraordinarily helpful. So you can see that my title is that my career was more by accident than design, and that's actually true. I had absolutely no intention of becoming a researcher, and my entry point to research was entirely accidental. In fact, I hated the idea of research, having done some undergraduate research, which I thoroughly despised. So it was only when I found an area that I found interesting and practical that it seemed worth embarking on a career in research. And I guess my talk is a little bit about how tangential careers can be as well. I think Liz and Alan have talked a lot about essentially an overriding concern with a specific sets of infectious diseases. I kind of started out that way, as many people do in global health or tropical medicine. So I started on malaria, but that actually didn't last very long, but it was enough to get me my first, if you like, taste of research and qualification. I then switched, partly from the vagaries of funding, but also because I trained as a general paediatrician, to start to look at a problem that was staring us in the face, but nobody seemed to want to pay much attention to. So this was back in the late 1990s, when newborn health was not really on the agenda. Maternal health was there, child health was there, but newborn health was not. And so I started to work in newborn health. But then I changed track again. So having done quite a lot of work that was beginning to feed into what were national and then international guidelines about the evidence that should inform care, I made a critical decision in career terms in retrospect, not one that I anticipated, in that I decided to go across Kenya and find out whether anybody actually had ever seen any guidelines, or whether they could even follow what was being talked about at global level and being suggested by myself and many other colleagues and scientists about what should be done. And the sad truth was that we discovered that essentially most people in Kenya in the very early 2000s had never heard of any of the WHO guidelines and certainly couldn't follow them. And so this was essentially the pivoting in my career to something which became known as implementation science about 5 or 10 years later. And I then tried to do things in parallel. I had to sustain a research career, so I had to ask research questions, but I also was interested in making things happen. Unfortunately, funders, well, depending on the type of funder, I've been very fortunate to get funding from the Wellcome Trust, but sometimes you have to keep your practical activities of trying to make things happen a little bit quiet because they're most interested in your research activities. So it's a relatively recent thing to talk about policy impact when it comes to research funding. But if you actually drill down into what research funders will pay for, there's rarely a budget line which says, I will achieve policy impact like this, and get a budget for it. So it's still an area in which is not actually directly supported very often. So I won't go through what I did, but essentially it actually consumed a large amount of my time while doing a whole bunch of research. And this is a sort of quick schematic. So in implementation science terms, I think we did the first cluster randomized trial of hospitals in Africa to test alternative implementation strategies, and essentially building up a set of team members, as Liz has described, building up collaborations with government, building up collaborations with local academic institutions, building up collaborations with hospital sites, allowed us to develop a portfolio of work, which I won't go into the details, but ended up being quite multidisciplinary, and I know that's occurred for others as well. And the red arrow there is when I was lucky enough to win the medal, which I guess makes me one of the younger people to have won it, although I haven't checked the list, which may reflect some of the gender biases that Bridget was talking about. But anyway, for whatever reason, I managed to get the medal, and I will talk a little bit about what impact it made. But I think one of the things that it allowed me to do was be confident that I hadn't veered completely off into a mad track, and that, you know, my peer group or others considered that some of the things that we were starting to do were still science, because I think there's quite a few people that it's taken a while for them to consider the sort of implementation interventions as a form of science. And so, especially for a society such as the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, was no longer really doing anything that anybody would call tropical medicine, you know, traditionally. And essentially building up this platform culminated about the time I got the medal. I had initiated something that we call the Clinical Information Network in Kenya, which is a form of learning health system. And so the team has been running this for about 11 years, and it is a true collaborative approach across us in a research institution at Kemry Wellcome, where I spent a lot of my career, with government hospitals, with the Ministry of Health, with different departments in the Ministry of Health, including unfashionable areas like the health information system, including other unfashionable areas like nursing, which 70% of the global health workforce is probably nurses, and yet they hardly feature anywhere in any forms of global health research. And we started doing work on things like patient experiences and the way managers work. So as you can see, I've essentially, I think one of the points of my talk is you can probably get by on a wing and a prayer, trying out a whole bunch of things. And I guess you're successful in retrospect if you're still going. But we have used multiple methods on top of this platform. So as well as allowing us to do lots of implementation research, the same platform has allowed us to do different types of trials. Our platform allowed us to evaluate the impact of the RTSS vaccine in Western Kenya, and also evaluate the impact of the rotavirus vaccine that was introduced by the government. And as I say, there's some difficult things to get funded, but are essential. So we have spent quite a lot of time thinking about information systems and thinking about how to make routine government information systems better so that they can actually be used for large-scale studies. And obviously that became a feature of the recovery trial. I'd like to think that we've been doing some of that since 2013 in using routine information systems and randomizing people to different interventions, but using the information system that was there to measure the outcomes. But this kind of approach takes quite a lot of time and discussion and negotiation with multiple partners. And essentially where I've kind of ended up, and I'm not sure whether I'm still anywhere near Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene territory, is beginning to think about how whole systems work and how one needs to intervene at system level to change patient outcomes or community level outcomes. And essentially, I guess you can see I'm still veering off any direct course and following my nose about what I feel is interesting and what seems to be important. This is a quick snapshot of a bunch of people, much like Liz, and I know Bridget, and I'm sure with Alan, you know, we are in one sense here talking about the things that we've managed to do with a huge number of other people. And I'm very grateful to my many colleagues. But I would also hope that, and I think many of us have also in that process also tried to develop the strengths of many of our colleagues, in my case in Kenya, so that they are now leading the initiatives and leading work in their own countries. And so now I work back in Oxford, and I'm a member of what we call the Health Systems Collaborative, and still trying to work in Kenya, but working across a wider number of settings, trying to introduce new methods and new thinking into some of what has been tropical medicine as a specialty. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Mike. I'm sorry, Mike, starting. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your career highlights. It's really helpful. All right, so all of our speakers have shared their advice and their thoughts. We have one question in the chat, and I am conscious of time, but I do want to ask all of our panelists one last question. So please, if you could put your cameras on and be ready for that. The question that's come into the chat while you're doing that is around whether social scientists working in the areas of tropical medicine and global health could win. And that's an easy one for me to answer, which is to say, yes, there's no limit in terms of the scope of different disciplines that we would award with this medal, and indeed any of our other medals and awards, that it doesn't matter what area or type of role you're in, as long as it's tropical medicine and global health, then we would be happy to see your application and it would be reviewed like any other. So I hope that's encouraging. So some really inspiring talks from our speakers. And one thing that you've all mentioned is that the success that you've had and that has led to the medal being provided is due to having great teams and having great communities around you, and what that's done. But I wanted to ask one question to each of you before we close, and that's obviously great teams don't happen by magic, and opportunities aren't always just about luck. So is there one approach, one direction that you've taken, one approach that you've had in your mind that has enabled those doors to open, those teams to be formed, your work to be successful and continued and move in various different directions, it sounds like? So the one thing that you might encourage from your career as an approach to take. I think I'll start. Liz, I'll start with you, as you started us off this afternoon.
Yes. So one, I'm not sure I can do one, but I do think the find fundable area where you think you're going to have impact. That I think is a common theme, and it's so much easier if you're living in a low-income country to identify that. I mean, it's just very obvious if you're practicing medicine, then what you see coming in the door, it should be sort of driving your thoughts about where the problems are. So that's right. A problem where which is clearly important from your clinical practice, where few other people have focused on. That I would say is a winning strategy, and for the teams, again, I think don't be afraid to recruit, to pick people who are just way better than you are, because that is what you need, and it's just fun, makes the whole thing so much fun.
Lovely, thank you, Liz. Alan, your thoughts on that?
I've been very lucky in my life, as I said, but one of the lucky things is being able to select teams to come and work for me once I'd got the funding, and I don't know how I managed to pick such good people, but I really did. Perhaps they were better than me, Liz. And the working together of a team. I had 20 people working with me for the last 20 years at SCI, and really they got on so well. I might perhaps add, for Bridget's sake, that 18 of them were female, and they were just so enthusiastic to do a good job so that they could make life better for so many people.
Lovely, thank you, Alan. Bridget, what would you say? You're muted, sorry.
Hopeless. I would say it has to be something that really moves you. Sometimes we look at things that are seem
worthy but dull.
Yes. It's got to be something that really matters to you, and if it does, then you will do almost anything to make it work. And if you get that positive reinforcement from really being motivated by the particular area that you're interested in, then it filters through to other people, I think, and getting a great team is important. So I would say be open-minded and try to find the thing that matters to you. Don't look at what may be more conventional, because if it's not what is really important for you, then it's never going to have that little extra, whatever it is, that leads to success.
Lovely, thank you. And finally, Mike, what are your thoughts?
So I'm not sure who's listening in the participants, but if you're at early stages of your career rather than later, then I think maybe, I suspect my colleagues would agree with me. In those early stages, as the investment in your team, who are usually therefore junior to you when you're at, it seems a lot of time and energy, but it's well worth it, because if you don't invest in them, they won't stick with you. So it's time and energy well spent, even though you could be out writing your own paper and making your own presentation at a conference and stuff like that. So yeah, don't underestimate the value of that to you in the long term. Over.
Lovely, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you again for giving up your time and being part of today, and your inspiring career stories. So I guess for those listening and watching this, do please consider those around you who you really want to recognize the success that they've achieved so far. There are not many opportunities in our community to recognize all of the incredible success that happens. and this is one way that you can do that. So before we close, I'm just going to pass to my colleague Nasreen, who's our membership manager. And this is one of a few medals and awards open this year, the Sir Rickard Christophers. And I just wanted to have a chance for her to share with you just her thoughts on those medals and awards this year, and try and inspire you to make your nominations for those that you feel deserve that reward. Nasreen, over to you.
Thank you, Tamar. So I just want to quickly, briefly, as Tamar mentioned, go over some of the medals and awards that are opening, and we are welcoming as many applications as possible. So if you are interested, do head over to our medal awards page, which gives you a little bit more detail about a breakdown of all the medals and awards that you can apply for. So we currently have this medal open up until the 10th of March, as mentioned before. And we've also currently got the Chalmers Medal, which is open until the 22nd of March. We have extended that deadline to this 22nd. It was originally the 5th of March. So you have a lot of opportunity to still apply, especially if you are in mid-career, which is the medal is for. We've also got the Emerging Leaders Award coming up for early career, which is going to be opening on the 11th of March until the 19th of April. We've also got the Donald Mackay for mid-career and senior level professionals with the same date. So it'll be open on the 11th of March until the 19th of March. We also have a recording from the previous winner of that award last year. So if you're interested in that, do send me an email. I can send you a link. And then lastly, we've got the President's Fund, which is also going to be opening on the 22nd of April until the 24th of May. And this is for non-members. So if you're not a member and you do live in a low-income country, you would be eligible to apply for that as well, which gives you funding for your membership if you cannot afford it. And I just wanted to mention that if you are not a member yet and you are interested in becoming a member with us, do drop me an email. I'll drop my email address in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as well for that. And once again, thank you to everyone that spoke today and everyone that's joined.
Lovely, thank you. And Liz, Alan, Bridget, Mike, thank you so much. And sorry, we've taken up a bit more time than we expected. Thank you to everyone else, and we hope to hear from you and see your awards in the next month or so. Thank you so much and have a good rest of day.
Thank you.